Hello everyone. Thanks for listening to our presentation about the GIST reading strategy. I will be giving a summary of the strategy, discussing some benefits and some important things to keep in mind, and my group mates TJ and Jacko will be discussing the strategy a little bit more thoroughly and breaking up the strategy into its three main parts, and then you'll be hearing a quick summary at the end. Just a brief summary on this strategy. GIST is an acronym that stands for Generating Interactions Between Schemata and Text. The goal is basically for students to read a short part of a text and then write a summary within a given amount of words. It can also be used as formative assessment, and it has been implemented during online learning in a few different ways. The most common way is to give students some place where they are able to upload their summaries, and then you could have a discussion on that forum itself. So what is GIST? GIST is a close reading strategy that supports students to develop a good, strong understanding of the text that they are reading. The students will read a selected portion of the text. It could be a paragraph, a few paragraphs, or it could even be something as just a short few sentences. After reading that part of the text, the students will then summarize that information that they have learned, and then they will be able to either discuss what they wrote or move on to reading the next part of the text. It helps students identify the information that's important to the text, important to understand the text, and it also helps students understand that there's information in a text that they don't need to pay as much attention to, and they can ignore that information. The strategy also supports and reinforces the students' understanding by having them summarize what they have read. They will be reflecting on it further, and also they will be able to explain it in their own words. The GIST reading strategy is primarily used during the students' reading time and right after the students have finished reading. While students are reading, they will be identifying keywords, key people, or key ideas that they are seeing in those texts. It could be things that are repeated often, or just whatever they think or feel is important to that part of the text. While students are reading, they will be answering the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. And it's used after reading when students have to generate a summary of the part of the text that they have read. After reading the text and writing the summary, students can also discuss their ideas about the text, and they can share their opinions about what they thought was important and what they thought was not necessary for their summary and why they felt that way. The main benefits of GIST for the general students is that it increases comprehension. It teaches students to pick out the important information and neglect the information that's not important. It teaches students how to reduce a lengthy piece of text into something that's easier to understand, and it also stimulates thinking to get students to make connections about the topic and to be able to connect what they have just read with previous parts of the text or parts of the text that they will be reading later on. The GIST reading strategy can be particularly helpful for English language learners. It can help those students access texts that might be too difficult or too long for them. It can help them break it up into smaller chunks or smaller sections that they are able to understand, and then they're able to put all those ideas together. If these students are also using text in any other subject area besides English, it would also help them in being able to understand those texts or at least be more successful in accessing those texts. It can also help English language learning students, as well as all students, develop confidence in their ability to read and understand the text. As you will see later, the strategy can typically be broken up into three main steps. The first step is identifying the subject. The next step would be to develop a main idea about what you have read about the text, and the last step would be to write a summary of what you have read. For the first step, students will read the paragraph, the short section, or the few sentences about the text, and they will reflect on what they have read, and then they will identify the main event, the main idea, or the main topic of what was just read. Then they will move on to step 2, and they will think about what was said about that person, that event, or those ideas. And students will think about what was essential to what they have read, and they will also identify what was not essential and what they will be able to remove or do without. The last step, students will be given a certain amount of words that they can use to write their summary. This amount of words will be decided by the teacher. It can be something like 10 words, 20 words, or for older students, they can do a longer summary like 50 words. Before we begin modeling the strategy, here are some important notes on the GIST strategy. GIST can take different forms depending on the group of students that will be using the strategy. They could have a different size text that they might read, or they might have a different amount that they will be reading. For example, they could be reading just a few sentences or a paragraph, or for more advanced students, they could read a few paragraphs. You can also include activities after the GIST strategy has been implemented, where students will write a longer summary, taking the shorter ones that they have written already and expanding them or combining them. You could also have a group discussion where students will share their ideas and discuss what they thought were the main topics of the text that they read. As with all strategies, teachers should use the gradual release of responsibility model. First, the teacher should be modeling the strategy to the students, discussing why they are doing the important steps that they take. The teacher can then move on to having the students working in small groups with the teacher's support, and then hopefully the students will be able to move on to an independent practice. GIST is a very student-centered strategy, but there are many important steps that the teacher needs to take, and the teacher also plays many important roles while the students are implementing the strategy itself. Before the students begin reading and implementing the strategy themselves, there's a lot of intellectual preparation that the teacher needs to do before the strategy takes place. The teacher must select the text and make sure that it is appropriate difficulty for the students that will be reading it, and also make sure that the topics covered are age appropriate to engage the students. The teacher will also identify keywords or difficult concepts that need to be previewed with the students. The teacher must also decide how they will choose to split up the text, whether by splitting it up into a few sentences or a paragraph or multiple paragraphs. The teacher should have a good understanding of their students and what they're able to do and how much they're able to read at one time. The teacher can also create handouts or graphic organizers that would help the students follow along with the strategy and complete it on their own. And the teacher must present any keywords or difficult concepts that they identified, and then engage the students' prior knowledge, either through discussions or some sort of video or recording or some other form of media, or perhaps just by sharing their own experiences or having the students sharing their experiences that might relate to the text that they'll be reading. When the strategy is first introduced, the teacher should be the one that is modeling the strategy and discussing why they are taking the steps or annotating the things that they are. Once the students are working in small groups or independently, the teacher should monitor that they are annotating the text, marking it, and that they are thinking about what is the main idea of what they're reading. The teacher could also ask some scaffolding questions like who or what was that part about? What important words did you find? Or what do you think is the main idea of what you have just read? After the students have finished reading, the teacher should monitor the students as they are writing their summaries. The teacher should check for any misunderstandings or misconceptions that the students might have and address those misunderstandings or misconceptions by having discussions with the students about the text, what was said in the text, and what the author may have meant by what they said in the text. The teacher can also lead the students in a discussion if they feel like the students are capable of doing that and that it would be beneficial for the students.
Hello everyone, TJ here, and I will be discussing about the 5 W's in the GIST strategy. So here are the most important indicators that we need to use in order to annotate the text. First one, who and what is a paragraph about? The second one is what about the who or what is the most important information. In addition, we add where, why, and when. So together we read it aloud as well as reread the text 2 times. Thereafter, we try to write the gist using only 20 words, and then after, we try to use 10 words. So here's the text that we will be using to annotate in our activity for today. So it is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. Let's read it together. I grew up around a father and a mother who read every chance they got, who took us to the library every Thursday night to load up on books for the coming week. Most nights after dinner, my father stretched out on the couch to read, while my mother sat with her book in the easy chair, and the 3 of us kids each retired to our own private reading stations. Our house was very quiet after dinner, unless, that is, some of my father's writer friends were over. My father was a writer, as were most of the men with whom he hung out. They were not the quietest people on earth, but they were mostly very masculine and kind. Usually in the afternoons, when that day's work was done, they hung out at the no-name bar in Sausalito. But sometimes they came to our house for drinks and ended up staying for supper. I loved them, but every so often, one of them would pass out at the dinner table. I was an anxious child to begin with, and I found this unnerving. That's it. And of course, do not forget to reread it. And now, we move on to the annotation of the text. I have annotated the text in 2 ways. First one is highlighting for those who can clearly see colors, and the second one is underlining since I'm colorblind. So we figured out that the who of the text is the father, that is why there's an underline and highlight. The what would be took us to the library every Thursday night to load up on books. Some informations just like our own private reading stations, house was very quiet after dinner, are some parts of the what as well. Another interesting or important information that we need to know is the father was a writer. Moving on, we go to the second part of our annotation, the when, where, and why. So the same annotation that we used was underlining as well as putting a highlight on the text. So when would be most nights after dinner, as well as library every Thursday night. The where would be the house, and the why would be private reading stations or to read. I also underlined my father was a writer is because it would add up to the why of the whole text. Now that we have identified the most important information, let us try to use or to sort out a 20-word sentence. Now we will try to generate interactions between schemata in text, or in other words, we are going to try and get the gist of the text. So with every information that we have got in our annotation, we are going to only use 20 or less words from Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott in order for us to get the summary of the text. So for me, I came up with father is a writer who took us to the library to load up books to read most nights at home. That's it. So I would also gladly want to hear and read what you guys have came up with. Using GIST strategy, we'll now form a sentence with only 10 words to summarize the text that we just read. Furthermore, I came up with Father is a writer who wanted us to read at home. Or we can also say Father is a writer who wanted us to read. So those are the two sentences that we can use in order for us to summarize the text by Anne Lamott. Going back, the text was composed of 186 words, 769 characters without spaces, and 954 characters with spaces. So now, using the tools that we used, we have only made up 10 words or less. And the most important thing about this is that we got the gist of the text. Before going to the part of summarization, I just want to share the importance of the gist strategy that we just did with the text Bird by Anne Lamott. So the first importance is to help students identify keywords, people, and ideas. Based on what we applied, we used the 5 W's to look for keywords and ideas from the text. The who, what, where, when, and why was very useful in our summarization of the text. Second one is to focus on key points. So by underlining, highlighting, it helps us a lot. Third one is to use keywords and phrases. The fourth one is break down the larger ideas. We try to do this by using only first 20 words in order for us to come up with a sentence. And the second one is to come up with a sentence only using 10 words. The last importance would be to help students write a summary of the part of the text. So this can also be used to annotate a long reading or article. This can be used for some classes, especially with graduate school, that can be very helpful in summarizing or getting the whole idea of an article or a text.
Get the gist. Even though this reading strategy is composed by 3 steps, we're going to focus on step 3 for this part of the presentation. Step 3. Summarize the main idea in 20 words or less. There are a few steps needed to implement a summary. After assigning a reading passage, the teacher can ask questions about main ideas, crucial details, and also irrelevant information. Then the students will use those questions and those answers to identify the keywords of the text. Practices are something that we want the students to do when summarizing. Pull out the main ideas, focus on key details, use keywords and phrases, break down the larger ideas, write only enough to convey the gist, and take succinct but complete notes. All these practices are fundamental for guiding the students throughout the process. Benefits of summarizing are mainly related to an increased comprehension, but also it teaches the students to pick out important information from a text and also how to use that information properly. As teachers, we should model summarizing by giving a reading focus to prepare the students for their tests. Also, we should teach them how to pick out keywords and how to use them to write a summary. Here is an example of keywords that I selected from the short text. The amphibia, which is the animal class to which our frogs and toads belong, were the first animals to crawl from the sea and inhabit the earth. Keywords that I selected are amphibia, animals, first, sea, inhabit, earth. And since I like visuals, I will try to explain how I understand summarizing using the keywords from the previous text. Keywords are just like dots in a drawing. They give us a general understanding of a big picture. When we start linking them together, though, using our own words, the main shape of that idea becomes clearer. And thanks to this interaction with the text, we can finally understand the big picture. The conclusions that we found with this presentation are that the goal of a GIST strategy is to write a summary of a text. Even though the goal is the summary, if the two previous steps are missing, this strategy cannot happen. Then summarizing can be used as a formative assessment. And this is really important because it can immediately serve as an adjustment for the current learning and also for the future. Identifying the keywords really assesses the comprehension of the material, and also using the keywords can assess the student's knowledge of this reading strategy. Lastly, even though this is a reading strategy, it includes a writing component that reinforces the student's reading comprehension. Here are the sources that we used to create our presentation. Thank you so much for your listening, and I'll see you all in the next class.